Hey, what's up, everyone? So I'm Dr. Dom.
I'm Doc Jen.
And we are going to be diving into probably our favorite PT Pro and one that people ask about the most because I just so happen to be sitting here with the mobility queen. So we're going to be talking mobility today. What is mobility? What's it mean? What are all these techniques people are throwing out? How long do I need to hold a stretch? All these different questions that will get asked about mobility and flexibility and all that stuff. And many of you who follow her on Instagram know that she has amazing mobility routines and also just brings the education down on what you can do at home to explore your own mobility. So, what is mobility?
Yeah, let's dive into that. I guess I do have a whole program on it, the mobility method.
Oh, there's a whole method for mobility? This is madness.
And I think it's really important to, kind of put our spin on what mobility is to kind of make it easier for people to digest and understand and why they would want to implement it into their lives and into their body. Usually when we're talking the difference between flexibility and mobility, flexibility is going to be more of that passive range of motion. So it is getting into a stretch without having any resistance or tension in your body. For gymnastics, because I grew up as a gymnast, we would put our foot on one stack of mats and then be in a split. So
that's crazy.
So some people are active and trying to fight and resist against it, but for the most part, you're supposed to be.
That would be me.
Oh, there was a lot of teammates like that. For the most part, you want to be relaxed and be able to gain passive flexibility. When we're talking about mobility, then it's then being able to take this range of motion in a split and make it active. So that's where you think of going into a split jump or going into a leap. Now I'm actively pulling my legs into this split position. So how much active range of motion do I have? Now there's camps, right? Of like only active mobility in the body, only passive. Yeah. And I think we just want to help to bring awareness of those.
Totally. And I think that's what we tend to do in general in a lot of topics. It's either this or this. And the answer is always both. And then some, so there's always more to explore. Are there any, I know that you show me lots of little things that people can explore where they can see the difference themselves right away, specifically with the wrists. I love the one that you show where it's just like, okay, if we're going to do a push-up or something, then you need to get your wrist to 90 degrees on the ground, right? And so everyone's like, oh yeah, I can do a push-up. My wrist gets to 90 degrees.
But sometimes it hurts, or it's in pain.
Yeah. Oh, but my wrist then hurts after I do push-ups for 10 days, or I get into a workout program with a lot of push-ups. So one thing that people want to try out, right, is we start here with fingers bent, right?
Yep. So fingers bent, forearms together.
Forearms together. Oh gosh.
That's already hard for a lot of people.
Right? This is as far as I can get. What are you doing to me? So, and then after that, we are going to extend those wrists, right? To try and get to that 90, right?
Yeah. You're trying to get your forearms together. You're trying to get your hands together in a fist right in front of you. And then keeping your palms together. So keeping those wrists together, you're going to just try to slowly start to let those hands fall away from each other. And then nice and slowly open those fingers until they become straight. And look at the angle of those straight fingers.
It's impossible.
Because if they're not at a 90-degree angle from the forearm to the hand, that's when you can say, okay, I understand now that pushing into a passive range, because right now you're going to be pushing into a passive range, but I'm active because I'm pushing and I'm pulling and I'm doing, active work and load, because now if I go into a plank or a push-up, I'm loading that passive range of motion like insane.
Yeah, you're putting most of your body weight through it, or a lot of your body weight through it.
So that's where obviously now I get cysts because I'm getting buildup of fluid in my wrist, or I'm getting tendons that are starting to pull in different directions, and I can get pains, and all these different strains and pains and things can start to happen in the wrist, and it's so common. But now that I understand it, it's so simple if we just think of, okay, obviously I'm loading the joint at my wrist in a range that it doesn't quite tolerate. So it obviously is going to start to build up fluid tension pressure in a way that my body cannot handle.
And if you notice, when I do that wrist exercise, when I get to the very end, I start to shake. And my body just kind of starts to shake and revolt, like, what the heck are you doing? And what are you trying? Why are we going all this way and supporting with our own muscles? And that's because it's telling you your nervous system just isn't as used to getting out to that point and supporting through that point. So that's a great way to know if you're ready to do those push-ups and what pressure you might be putting into the wrists to compensate for some of that active motion.
Right. In order to gain that active range of motion, what's happening? Is it only the joint? Is it only the joint that needs to gain active? So yeah, I can keep pushing and activating and opening and opening and opening. But I would say before you just start smashing into, not smashing, but over activating and maybe flaring up muscles and tendons that are overworking, you have to say, why might they be overworking? And it could be the tension and the tightness on the opposite side. So that's where I love this idea of like, now we get to bring in both parties of passive stretching, flexibility for the muscles on one side so that we can actively get those muscles and tendons to open so that we can free up the pressure at the joint. So it starts at a passive level. One thing that I always show, right, is just going back and this can be done like if your hand is on a table.
One hand at a time.
I don't like this way as much because the fingers still stay bent.
Yes. True. Well, I just showed a bad example.
No, it's not a bad example. It's a great way to start. It's a great way to start. But I like to have the fingers flat because your flexors of the forearms do extend all the way out to the tips of your fingers.
So if you do it, try to keep those fingers straight. And what we're showing is just passively kind of pulling those fingers and that wrist back.
With an arm straight.
Yep, with an arm straight. So you should feel that stretch kind of in the front of your forearm.
Now it goes back to how long should we be holding a stretch, right? Because most of the time, who has time to stretch?
Everyone has time to stretch.
Everyone does. No one makes it a priority.
Yes, we all have time to stretch. Not a lot of us choose to stretch.
Yes. I will credit Andrea Spino, Dr. Andrea Spino. He's a chiropractor up in Canada. I believe we're tapping into the nervous system as well when we start to hold that long and we're telling the nervous system, hey, you're cool, you're safe. Like, you know, after you pass a minute, you're like, oh, I can actually breathe and I'm not dying in this position. So you're also telling the tissue to release tension.
And I think that in those 2 minutes, there's a lot of conditionals also. The quality of how we're holding those 2 minutes and what we're doing with, you know, our mindset or our breath during those 2 minutes is almost just as important in my book. We can hold a stretch for 10 minutes. We might never get there and we might actually create more tension in those muscles and make them want to release less because our nervous system's a little scared to go there. And a way to take control of that is with those nice long, low breaths, long exhales, and it puts us in a more relaxed, safe place in our nervous system. And when I hear this 2 minute mark, I tell a lot of people, if you're waiting for the 2 minutes to get up, that's not the right mindset. We should be taking breaths and counting 20 breaths, and then the 2 minutes will be done after about 12 of them.
Yeah.
And if you're more focused on that, on the breath rather than the destination, it's not about a destination, it's about a sensation when we stretch.
And especially when you start to increase the time under tension, like a stretch is still tension, a stretch is still load. And it's a first step into loading the tissue. So if we can start to increase our time under tension just through that stretch, then we help to change the way that muscle, the tendon, the cells all the way down are going to be responding to that range of motion. So that's why it helps. We're not necessarily taking a tissue and just elongating it. We're changing the way that the brain responds to that tissue and the way that the cells interact together. Something
that I love to share with people, and it's kind of, I don't know, a little gives you the heebie-jeebies to imagine it, but when someone's under anesthesia or asleep for surgery, you can take their leg and put it up over their shoulder. The muscles can lengthen to that point. So when we talk about lengthening and shortening muscles, we're not actually physically lengthening and shortening anything. We're sending different messages to tell that muscle, hey, we want to rest at a different resting length.
Yeah.
it always has those different lengths available.
Exactly.
It's just a matter of whether we can go there.
Let's go back to the wrist example again then. Okay, I'm holding that stretch, opening up my flexors to the front of the forearm and fingers back behind you so that you can melt into that stretch a little bit more, right? And I'm going to hold that for about 2 minutes. Then what do I do after I do a passive stretch?
Then we actively support in that range.
And there's so many different techniques. I mean, I've shown many through my page at DocJenFit.
Should I show one quick right here? If you're on your knees and you've been stretching this way, then you can put your hands here and just kind of press up, keeping those fingers nice and strong so they're not completely not breaking, but resting into their extreme ranges. So keep active through those fingers and through those wrists, and then just kind of press up here a couple times and lean into that full wrist extension and then press up. And then you'll start to feel when you get into those extreme ranges and activate, you're like, ooh, that's a little different than I normally feel in push-ups.
Yeah. Now we stretched the tissue. We got into a new passive range. Now we're going to say, okay, now can I load the tissue and can I still make it feel safe within that range? And so when we start to build up this passive and this active capacity around the joint, then we really start to open up that joint space in a healthy way. The basis of mobility is that we find the foundation within your body. And I think that's what people need to realize. And that's why I have a whole mobility method, because if you want to go work out, you want to go load your body, you want to go do other things, you have to see where your body is restricted first. So within the mobility method, this is just a little plug just because we're talking about it, there's a whole self-assessment. So there's 23 different movements that you can go through on your own to really assess what's happening within the body. And then from there, you can choose the exercise necessary. When we're looking at the foundation again, I like to guide it back into like a baby. If we look at a baby, they come out healthy, right? Their bellies are going to be rising and falling. So you see their belly naturally rising and falling. So that's why we like to get to foundation of breath. Then as they progress and they age, a natural thing for a baby to do is, along the developmental milestone, is they start exploring their feet into their mouth. And so they start to have this natural elongation of the hamstrings, of the legs, of the hips, of the back. All these...
The pelvis starts to move.
Yes, the pelvis starts to move. Like all these areas start to increase in mobility. And then they will start to learn how to crawl and walk after that. But if we go back to these progressions of even how we are as a baby, like it just makes sense. If we just look at the fundamentals of us as humans and how we naturally go through life, like go through these stages again. And this is why other people who are my mentors as well, we talk about rolling, we talk about different patterns within the body as well, which we can get down into later.
I was going to say, we'll do that in another podcast.
Exactly.
We don't want to jump right into rolling right now.
But that's why building upon your foundation, and mobility is going to be your foundation. I would say breath first, and then mobility, and then you can start to increase your strength and load a lot more into those ranges.
Yeah, what is it? There's like the progression. Is it mobility, stability, controlled mobility, and then skill?
Yeah.
It's like this neurodevelopment pattern where you find stability first, then you find mobility first, then you find stability, string that together to make it stable throughout that whole mobility.
Yeah.
And then we progress into these skills. Connie Bogard, shout out to my neurodevelopment teacher. She would always come back to that.
Yeah.
That's the progression, whether it's a baby learning or whether you're coming back to it later in life.
Exactly. And we lose it because we sit in chairs all day long, or because we find our one pattern that we move through, and that's natural. Just like we adapt into becoming tighter, we can adapt into becoming more mobile. And one last thing that I think we wanted to end with is just the joint by joint method. So this is brought to you by Gray Cook, and he just makes it very simple to understand. So this is a broad, overall, general outlook on the body. But in general speaking, we have these areas that should have more mobility versus more stability. And if we go down the body, it alternates. So the neck more stable, the upper back more mobile, the low back more stable, the hips more mobile, the knees more stable, the ankles more mobile, the feet more stable, the toes more mobile. And if you think about that, the areas where people usually get more pain are
the knees, the low back.
Yep. And the neck.
Yeah.
The areas of stability. And so if we just start to say, okay, well, instead of just strengthening what is hurt, what if I actually started to look above and below and say, oh, well, is my upper back even moving very well? Are my hips moving very well? Maybe that's why I'm getting low back pain.
Generally, there's something else throughout the body that may not be quite doing its job either.
Yeah, and that's why the mobility method has 2 breath classes too, to help you understand, because it doesn't have to be complicated. There's only 2 on there because, again, it does not need to be complicated. It needs to be effective. So if you can start to create that more efficient and effective pattern within the body, and then start saying, oh, is my shoulder taking on more pressure because my upper back wasn't moving well, and my diaphragm wasn't moving well, and my inner core wasn't stable, and so then my rib cage couldn't move as well with my shoulder blade in my shoulder. I mean, that's why we also can't just say, oh, you have shoulder pain? Let me tell you what to do about it. Because it can be coming from so many different areas. But that's why just start with the foundation, look at your breath, figure out what's not moving well in your mobility, and do both passive and active.
Absolutely. And if you didn't get a few amazing mobility tips from all that, I don't know where else you should go to look. But that was
or DocJenFit.
Yeah, true. DocJenFit. She'll have a lot more information there. But that was amazing. Thank you for giving us some of your pearls in this PT Pearl. We're so excited to bring you guys more PT Pearls. Please just give us any recommendations or things that you want us to dive into and talk about as far as our perception and opinions and the science and facts that we do know, and how we package them all together to try and help you understand how to bring these tools to find your optimal body.
Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you're enjoying it. Don't forget to like and comment below to let me know what you think, and subscribe so you don't miss any in the future.